America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Natalia Mehlman Petrzela, author of Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. And later in the show, Daniel Finn, features editor at Jacobin, to give us an update on UK politics. Meanwhile, the Fed is yet again raising interest rates, this time by 1/4 point to 5%. Progressives continue to sound alarm bells. A federal appeals judge has ruled against Trump in his quest to hoard classified documents. Stop the steal.
The archivist.
Of the documents.
Doing my own archival work now.
I said for Trump on it. The White House is shutting down its COVID response team ahead of the public emergency declaration expiring in May. Just 'cause. The Senate voted 86-9 to keep the 2001 AUMF, a war on terror relic that gives the president extreme latitude. The Chicago Teachers Union has endorsed Brandon Johnson in the mayoral race, and his poll numbers have soared. The Biden administration is defending its approval of a copper mining project in court. The project would destroy sacred Apache religious sites in the Southwest. And an AP poll has Biden's approval rating near the lowest of his presidency, down 7 points from 45% last month. The UN's water conference, first in decades, highlights how 2 billion people, 1/4 of the planet, doesn't have access to clean drinking water. And that's only going to get worse with climate change. A Wyoming judge has temporarily blocked the state's abortion ban. In Florida, however, DeSantis is proposing expanding Don't Say Gay to every grade, up to 12. Free speech. This comes as Florida's right-wing House of Representatives has proposed an anti-trans bill so extreme and broad, it could affect birth control and breast cancer patients. And lastly, Kari Lake's latest challenge to her election loss has been basically entirely, with the exception of one case, shot down by the Arizona Supreme Court. Whoops! All this and more on today's Majority Report, or EmMajority Report, as we call it over here. Hope everyone's doing well. It is Thursday. Hello, Matt. Hello, Bradley.
Hello, Emma.
Sam is done recording the PBD podcast.
Oh, yeah, I saw some when did that air? Was it last night or is it this morning?
It's out on YouTube today.
Oh, it's out already?
Because I saw some reviews in the chat.
Interesting.
Yeah,
so it's already out. Did they do it live?
Mm-hmm.
Well, do it live.
It was live. It started streaming live about I think around 9 a.m.
Oh, cool. Well, I am definitely excited to check that out a little bit later. You guys should all check that out. He's like a kind of right-wing business type guy, and he's been doing debates with a variety of people. Like David Pakman was on there, other online leftist personalities.
I know nothing about him, but I can say and no offense to anybody else who has these initials, but PBD.
It reminds me of peanut butter.
I don't like that as a combination of letters.
What? Because they all rhyme.
They all rhyme. PBD. It reminds me of Sebede. I'm not. That's why I'm not going to learn anything about the guys, so I can just keep that sort of surface level critique. Because I don't like the sound of his.
I mean, who says that's surface level, right? To me, it's like that's a meta critique of just like his name construction. Now, let's turn to this here, because I mentioned in the headlines that the Biden administration is closing down its COVID response team in the White House ahead of the end of the emergency declaration in May. You know, I don't understand the rush to end the COVID emergency declaration. You could just keep it in perpetuity and have some of the advanced capacity that provides to you at your disposal, especially because we don't know what's going to happen in the coming months as the virus mutates. But there seems to be this like desperate push to the right on many fronts.
What state still has the state of emergency for COVID?
Which state?
Texas, because he wants to use it for border stuff.
So he's ending Title 42, but then trying to replace it with basically Trump's policy on immigration. That'll definitely appease the right wingers on Fox News. They'll definitely not say that the borders are open. I mean, they will, no matter what he does. Same thing with COVID. They'll still call you a COVID authoritarian, even if you end this emergency declaration. And the problems that this is going to create, Bernie highlights this here in this hearing with the Moderna CEO, Stephanie Bancel. And Moderna, I mean, they're all price gougers, but in the pandemic, Moderna was known to like be incredibly aggressive on this front. They are proposing to quadruple the price of the COVID vaccine so that they can make a profit. And Bernie kind of hammered her here on that point.
It was announced that the federal government put money into Moderna. The stock prices soared. You became a multi-billionaire overnight. So it's hard for me not to believe that the federal government played a major role in the development of this drug. But here is the main point. I don't want to talk about what happened 3 years ago. We're here today. You're a multi-billionaire. Other people, top executives in your company are multi-billionaires, all developed as a result of the vaccine. And now we have a situation where you are proposing to quadruple the price of the vaccine once the government stockpile runs out. That will mean that not only, and we'll talk about later on the patient assistance program, but in terms of government, in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, other government agencies, taxpayers are going to have to spend substantially more money. My question to you is, given the fact that you have made billions of dollars, that your company has made huge profits, on behalf of the taxpayers of this country, will you reconsider your decision to quadruple the price of the vaccine?
So, Chairman Sanders, what we have to do is to deal with the complexity I described, and I'm happy to go into more detail through this hearing. This is not the same product. We used to have 10 doses in each vial. Now we're going to have every vial will have a different dose. This is not the same.
I understand it, but quadrupling the price is huge, and I would hope very much that you will reconsider that decision. It's going to cost the taxpayers of this country billions of dollars. Is that something you can do?
The volume we had during the pandemic gave us economies of scale we won't have anymore. That is why it's different.
Well, okay, first of all, he's, I guess, French. I thought Stephanie was a woman's name in this instance.
My bad. There's an accent on the E.
I don't know if that would have helped me on the sound sheet, Bradley, but regardless, like, so I have a simple solution for Stephanie Bancel there. Since the United States taxpayers pay for that research, we can just take it off your hands. You don't have to worry about raising the price and just, like, give it to the government. I mean, in any sane society, the federal government spending billions of dollars on the research and development of these kinds of life-saving vaccines, made possible by the emergency authorization and the government, and taxpayer money, as Bernie says. In any sane society, that would mean that the state would then own that product because, in terms of investment, the state provided these companies with the necessary funds to develop this life-saving technology. So cool. That inflated your stock price. Everyone got really rich off of that, even if the vaccines were technically free because they were paid for by the government. Moderna and Pfizer made windfall after windfall because of the success of the vaccine that was made possible, again, by taxpayer money. Now, you guys can take your bag and go home. The stock price has gone up. You've all made a bunch of money, I'm sure, on stock buybacks and all of that good stuff. Take your bag and then give it to the state, which they'll never do, because now that they have a successful vaccine product, they're going to try to milk it for all it's worth. Which they should be waiving. Well, they should have been forced to waive the IP by the Biden administration, but that's the limits of liberalism versus kind of leftism.
I mean, that's the real problem here is like, Bernie's trying to get this guy to make commitments that the structure of our society doesn't allow him to actually make. I do want to just dwell on like how useless the sort of anti-vaxxer left is, and basically sort of aiding this robbery, which like these guys are getting out of here with this intellectual property, because this stuff is all confused because half of maybe not half of the left, but a lot of these morons on the anti-vax side of thing have been acting like these things are causing sudden death. And that's completely confused the response to this, which is like to call for nationalization and public IP for stuff like this. Like, what is the theory here? That Moderna just wants to let rich people get access to this sudden death causing, and this is satire, YouTube, sudden death causing concoction. Like, of course, that's ridiculous. And that's why I say like those people have been working for pharma despite saying everybody else is.
Yeah. So the proposed hike is $130 per vaccine dose without insurance. And that means that what Moderna is attempting to do here, because, well, really, we can blame Biden here, but this all started because the Trump administration in 2020 essentially just gave them a blank check and said, yeah, you have no assurances to us. Here's the taxpayer giveaway, corporate welfare for this company. This is just going to further widen the gap that we have, where because we have privatized healthcare, the poor in this country have such disparate health outcomes to wealthy people who have access to these kinds of things that now, and this already happened during COVID, the gulf is going to continue to widen because people who are uninsured are not going to be able to pay $130 per vaccine dose. And frankly, the government needs to get off its ass and ban this kind of stuff and put some price controls, especially given the context that we just delineated about how we paid for it. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be joined by Natalia Mehlman Petrzela. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Natalia Mehlman Petrzela, Associate Professor of History at the New School and author of the book Fit Nation, The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. Natalia, thanks so much for coming on.
I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So, I find it fascinating, and beauty standards changing throughout history is not a new topic, but how rapidly women in particular changed from exerting yourself with exercise is discouraged, and it's frankly unattractive and unbecoming. Mm-hmm. And then soon, it's necessary to be considered, attractive in society, and that's driven in part by, as you write in your book, like this wave of industry in fitness. So, how did things change so quickly on that front?
Yeah. So for women, there's this really kind of complicated push and pull, which is exactly what you articulate. That on the one hand, when you think about like exercise in women, there's this great triumph that like women who were told like just sit there in luxurious comfort and God forbid you get muscles or sweat, like we don't have that anymore, right? But by the same token, now we have these pressures that like, to be a lady, you should be going to spin class or doing bar and have a six pack and biceps. And so I kind of show the way that happened. And I think that it's a mixture of like some really wonderful advances that feminists and kind of women's health advocates have been at the forefront of promoting, of saying, women can run long distances and lift heavy things, and it's good for them, us, to be physically active. But on the other hand, and this is what's kind of insidious and disturbing, one of the reasons it's actually been sort of easy to sell exercise to women is because so much of the marketing is actually tied up with like, this will make you pretty, this will make you thin. Like it's normal for women to want to work on their appearance. So this isn't really about strength or sports. This is about being hot. And that's something that's actually always been really easy to sell to women in this country.
Yeah, so I mean, take us back then to like Jack LaLanne and some of these exercise gurus marketing themselves to housewives, and how this really all started.
Yeah, Jack LaLanne's a major figure in here. So some of our younger listeners, viewers probably won't know who he is. So he was kind of like one of the first really important fitness influencers, definitely through media. He had a TV show called The Jack LaLanne Show. And to give you a sense, so this guy, Jack LaLanne, came out of Muscle Beach. He was a bodybuilder. And he was one of these guys who was honestly seen like with a lot of suspicion, like these men who lifted weights and like worked on their body all day. It was like, there's something wrong with you. Like you're narcissistic, you're weird. So he decides, well, no, I'm going to have this TV show where I'm not only going to exercise on TV, but I'm going to invite people to do it with me. No one wanted to fund it. They're like, nobody would ever do this. This is so weird. So he gets the money together, and his audience is homemakers, suburban homemakers, mostly white women in the 1950s. And when you watch, it's really interesting because there's something like, sort of very empowering about it. He talks about exercise being a way to feel happier and healthier. And he says like, set aside your ironing, ladies. This is time for you. And there really is that like me time aspect to like working on your body. On the other hand, if you watch like hours and hours of this, as I did, there's this kind of like dark undercurrent, which is basically like, and if you don't feel energetic, young, healthy, and combat those spreading hips, you have no one to blame but yourself. You should be exercising every day. And I think that kind of push-pull, again, is like still really with us. There's something great about exercise as me time, but it's also this other freaking thing that you have to do or you're expected to do.
I mean, I feel this personally, right? Like I try to go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week. And if I don't do that, I feel genuinely bad about myself. Like I do not feel good. And I feel a lot of guilt associated with it.
I am sorry about that. I think you are not the only one who feels that way, men or women, by the way. It took me like almost 10 years to work on this book. And every time I'd be like, oh, I'm writing a book about fitness culture, people would be like, I'm so bad, I haven't worked out. And I'm like, I'm not the police, and right. But I am charting the history of that expectation. And I think one of the reasons it's hard to kind of, unbraid all of the things going on there is because on the one hand, we do know exercise is really good for you. It's not surprising that you feel better when you exercise 3 to 4 times a week. Like science, people with degrees, that are not mine, have shown that really is key to feeling good and living a longer, healthier, happier life, all the rest. On the other hand, like there is that part where it's like, well, why do you feel bad? Because you're not actually getting the physiological benefits, or because you're being kind of told all the time, like you're not a good person if you don't exercise. And so that's a lot of what I'm trying to kind of get us to think critically about in this book.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so much of that comes from the consumptive element or consumption element with exercise, which means that like what you wrote about, and I haven't really thought about the fitness industry as broadly as of course you did in your book, and you also worked in it as well. The idea that the private sector has essentially created this explosion of gyms, fitness classes, equipment, everything kind of in the private space. And that is really what is associated with fitness, specifically in the United States, as opposed to outdoor public spaces where everyone can work out together for free. I mean, what was your take on that, particularly because I know you've worked at places like Lululemon that are clearly at the center of this?
Slightly privatized part of that sector. Yeah, no, absolutely. So like there's this kind of two big picture narratives that I try to trace over more than a century. And one is how exercise went from being something considered sort of like shady and weird and suspicious and narcissistic, you know, for men and women in different ways. It was considered inappropriate, to being something that in a culture where we are so divided on basically everything, most people agree exercise is good for you. Like, I don't care who you voted for, like that's kind of a consensus position. On the other hand, what's so sad to me is exactly what you hint at there, which is that despite these moments in our history when that consensus like almost yielded like great public infrastructure for recreation, for physical education, pools, parks, all that kind of stuff, instead, it's actually a private industry that has run with that idea that exercise is good for you. It makes you a good person. It's like, integral to mental health and to, spiritual health and to community and all that. And for the most part, that's something that we're sold as a product, as opposed to something that we're guaranteed as kind of a right of humanity or citizenship. And so, part of this book is I kind of look at, I don't want to say the rise and fall, but the rise and kind of, dubious state of the physical education profession. And also like what happened to some of these policy initiatives, like in the Cold War, where the idea was introduced that fitness is part of being a good American. And there were some real problems with the assumptions of like the way that worked, but it was considered to be a public priority. We've largely lost that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I think maybe drives some of the resentment or pushback. Like, well, one, when Michelle Obama was saying there should be healthy eating in schools, a lot of that's just like, well, you're a Black woman. So there's resentment there, right? Like just general racism about anything she does. But also because it's not introduced to the public as a public good, providing for the fitness and nutrition of human beings. It's such a privatized space at this point that I think there's natural gatekeeping and frustration from average people. I mean, you talk about how only 20% of Americans actually fall under the category of exercising regularly and are able to use these systems. And that's because we have a sickness in this country called capitalism that keeps people out of these spaces. But like that alienating element, I think there's a connection there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the reasons that the whole exercise ethos is so appealing in our country is because it's so individualistic, right? There's this appealing mythology, everything about the myth of the self-made man and self-fashioning. What more appealing place to think that's really possible than the gym? All you need is to get outside and have some motivation and willpower. And if you don't do that, it's on you. And that is so dominant in our kind of fitness culture. So I try to say, actually, that's a really unfair assumption. And that's so disempowering and doesn't even account for why 80% of people are not, getting the recommended daily minimum of exercise. And well, the book's about fitness, it's connected to all these other aspects of inequality in our country. Like if you live in a neighborhood without tree cover, it's that much hotter to go outside and run however many days a year. If you live in a body where you're considered suspicious or vulnerable when you go out for a jog, I don't care if you have all the willpower in the world, you're going to be less likely to do that safely. Very similarly, if you even think about housing and, how long it takes you to get to work, or if you work unpredictable shift labor, like how hard is it to be able to work this into your life? And so, that's something that I really try to like stay on topic with fitness, would say this is connected to so many other aspects of inequality and like more individual willpower and gumption. Though, yes, you do need that, whoever you are, to get off the couch and work out. And we probably all, sometimes need that reminder. That is not the solution here or the problem.
Right. Yes. And it's become a symbol of affluence, right? Yeah. In the way that other, say diamonds were in the housewife era, or the right kind of dress, like, or in the pre-Jack LaLanne era before it became more mainstream. Yeah. Like, it's amazing how quickly it turned from an empowering branding to something that causes like general alienation, or like another sense of anxiety about not being enough.
Absolutely. And I mean, you see like starting really in like the late 1950s with some of the early kind of chain gyms. I talk about these Tanny health spas. There's so much effort, and they're smart to realize this, that these entrepreneurs put into like selling the idea that exercise is not this like gross, weird thing that happens in basements with like big dudes pumping iron. This is about an affluent lifestyle. And they're like tropical fish tanks in the gyms. And like they all say they have like thick carpeting, which I think is disgusting, but that's supposed to be this kind of sign of luxury that goes with exercise. But, you see versions of that well into today. And to me, like, big picture, it really speaks to how we think about exercise in this country as like somewhere between labor and leisure. I think as opposed to like the diamonds or the fancy car or the expensive cocktails, like people are actually more comfortable in some ways spending a lot of money on exercise because like, well, that's work. And that shows that you are, investing in yourself and in health. And those are virtuous things. Whereas the kind of overt, conspicuous consumption of more flashy things, there are people who are into that, but there are more people who are uncomfortable with it. One moment just recently, I think that might interest like your particular audience, is like one thing that I realized is like, we had the financial crash in 2008, 2009. Obviously, so many people losing their homes, foreclosures, all the rest. It's also the rise of boutique fitness in that moment, which is like the highest price point at that time. And one of the ways that I argue that I think that actually makes sense is that it's also the moment when social media really comes out and people are pressured to perform their lives all day, their consumption habits. It's no longer really tasteful to show off a lot of money and spending in fancy life if you have it, but to show off, oh, I spent, $30 on this exercise class because I care about health, or $100 on these yoga pants. That sort of is a little bit more culturally acceptable because we so sanctify the pursuit of health and fitness.
Yeah, the sanctifying part is fascinating to me. But it's just like, can you expand on that point about it becoming a consumptive, performative element? Because it fitness being consumption, I don't necessarily think is a concept that might come naturally to people when they think about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think there's this really big turning point in the 1950s in the Cold War where, exercise had been suspicious and weird for all the reasons that we said. And then there's this sense that, well, actually, like the good life that Americans are living and that we say to the Soviet Union, like we've got all these great things. We've got suburbs and cars and TV sets and frozen food and all these things. There's some people who look at the results of that on American bodies and they're like, actually, this thing that you trumpet as an example of American strength is actually making us weak. And like Eisenhower and JFK jump right on this. JFK is like, condemning the soft American in the pages of Sports Illustrated. And they start to have this kind of promotional program to have fitness programs, recreation, physical education in schools. Like to be a good American is to be fit. That kind of falters. Like it's never really very well funded. The kind of pressures of the Cold War change. All these people who are actually like, what are you doing? We shouldn't be preparing like, these fit people. We should be spending on science and technology. That side of like the Cold War pressure kind of wins out. But what you have is this whole generation of entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, it makes you a good American. And it also shows that you have money to spend. And it's also almost a little bit of like, a kind of of Protestant work ethic. Like you can show off that you're working hard,
Yes.
come spend money and do that, and come join these communities, gyms, health clubs, etc., to find like-minded people who want to work on their bodies in the same way. And so that's kind of like the general idea. And then it takes different shapes. Like you see, this idea that like working on your body is part of like a fully actualized self, and that it's up to you, the individual, to take your health in your hands. That is so appealing across the political spectrum. And, I write about like feminists who are like, yeah, like take the power back from these doctors in white coats, Black Panthers saying versions of the same thing. And then you've got these like hardcore libertarians and people at Oral Roberts University who are like, yeah, like, it's up to you, personal responsibility. Don't wait for some government like healthcare handout. Get out there and run on the open road. And you really see that ideology with exercise at its center being something embraced across the political landscape, and thus marketed really, really effectively, especially as we get into an era of austerity politics when a lot of funding for all kinds of public programmings, PE and otherwise, fall away. And it's really something, and it's really depressing. Like I read all these PE journals, physical education journals, and like in the late 70s, early 80s, they're like, our time has come, for our profession. Like this is going to be the boom moment for phys ed. And it never really happened, in part because a lot of those programs were defunded, and people who would have gone into PE, I heard again and again in my interviews, were like, actually, I can make all this money making VHS and, connecting with all these communities in other ways. Can you imagine? I would have been a phys ed teacher. And to me, that's so sad, because that's where most Americans will first encounter exercise. And it's seen as this kind of, depressing path. And I think that's unfortunate. And,
we don't pay our teachers enough, right? Like it's a part of, we've commodified this space so entirely, as you lay out so well in your book, that it keeps people who might be talented in that sphere from entering into the public sector, because what is the public sector for exercise? And something that you said really reminded me of like when you talked about how there's the Protestant work ethic being displayed physically if you're physically fit. It's that. It's also the fact that you're, as you also, I'm kind of reiterating, you're wealthy enough to have the time to do this. You're also wealthy enough to probably go to a boutique fitness club like Equinox or Lifetime. Or the third thing here too is I've read about this in connection to like analyzing the Kardashians and their social, what they kind of epitomize about our culture, is that there's this new era of like beauty and fitness where displaying the work and money that goes into your body is a big part of the beauty standard, which is why when people say, oh, they look fake, that's kind of the point, because it's showing I have the money and the funds to make my face contoured in a way through surgery, through injections, whatever, that can also display my wealth. It's almost alien or otherworldly. And that is, I think, another extension of the performance of like making, capitalism be a part of your body.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's so interesting. Like, obviously, like professional, like image people for a long time have kind of exercised, but like well into I would say the early 2000s, it was kind of like a behind the scenes thing that you did. Like, Jane Fonda didn't want to record her first VHS tape, in part because she's like, I'm a movie star and it's very vulnerable to be like working out on a VHS tape. Like, what is that? I'm paraphrasing her, but now we don't have that. It's part of the appeal to kind of show the work. And I think you're right that it like does cohere with all of, Ozempic or the injections or all of the different kinds of chemical interventions that people make and surgical ones. But I do think I haven't quite figured out the way this is going to play out now or in the future, but there's always been a real tension between like people who get their appearance like through exercise, which we tend to think is like legitimate because you're like, you've got the willpower to do it, versus this quote unquote easy way out of, wearing a corset, or fashion. A lot of health, a lot of fitness proponents would say like, you don't know what really lies underneath like that, those dresses or those corsets or whatnot. And so I think there's a little bit of that discourse around the surgery, although you're right, like it does take work and money and pain to do any of it, if it's not the pain that we conventionally associate with exercise.
Yeah, and it is, in terms of like the gyms in and of themselves, it also shows how like choosing between, say, going to Equinox or Planet Fitness or Blink, which we have here in New York, I mean, that also is a moment of class stratification and class anxiety in and of itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all of those places signify very different income levels. I do think it's really notable, though, that how expansive this sector is. And the fact that even, with the pandemic, like when people thought brick and mortar was dead, it is not dead. It's basically back. And we have expansion at the kind of very low end, that's Planet Fitness and Blink, and also at the very high end. Like the high end, to me, I can't believe it. The price points keep getting higher and higher and higher. Like there seems to be no ceiling as to what people are willing to do in terms of luxury and equating luxury with fitness.
Yeah. Lastly, I mean, I am curious about what you think about the personalization of some of the fitness equipment that's being used, where it's now moved from you can become a part of this club and that can be your class signifier if you're an Equinox member, to now you need to also have it in your home, and you can this isn't about community anymore. This is about like I mean, I know that was pandemic focused as well, but these are products that are further atomizing and making them extremely private outside of the public sphere. Yeah, it's really hard to say it represents one thing, the kind of home fitness trend. I think on the one hand, there is the kind of it's like the hyper atomization. There's not even the kind of unexpected conversation in the locker room or with the front desk person, or the maybe not getting the spot that you want. You kind of take away that third place socializing, and you just have I want my playlist and my person at my time. It's like the Uberification of exercise. And I think that that signifies all the troubling social atomization that we're talking about. On the other hand, at-home exercise has also always been a real engine of inclusivity for people who don't feel comfortable going to gyms, for people with childcare challenges, for people with a range of disabilities. So I hesitate to say it just represents one thing, but one thing I do think is interesting is that for much of American history, at-home exercise devices were always sold as this is cheap and no one will know you have it. You can hide it away. Now it's the Peloton is like a freaking piece of furniture that people show off, and I think that that's interesting in terms of it not being something you wouldn't want people to know you do, but rather something that people still kind of peacock about, even if it's at home. Well, really fascinating read. Natalia Mehlman Petrzela, associate professor of history at the New School, author of the book called Fit Nation: The Gains and Pains of America's Exercise Obsession. We'll put a link to the book in the description everywhere you're listening to or watching this, and at majority.fm. Thanks so much, Natalia. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Of course. All right, guys, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Daniel Finn. are back, and we are joined now by Daniel Finn, features editor at Jacobin, author of One Man's Terrorist, A Political History of the IRA. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you wrote a long piece in Jacobin that we'll link to, and I encourage everybody to read, about what The Economist has deemed, quote, the great moderation in the UK right now. And that refers to kind of the expulsion of Jeremy Corbyn and then subsequently Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP. Explain that for our audience, especially if they're not from the UK, what that means and what the term great moderation is supposed to kind of engender.
Yeah, the article was inspired by that piece from The Economist and some other commentary along similar lines in the British media, which seized upon the fact, it was a coincidence, but on the same day last month in February, Nicola Sturgeon resigned as the leader of the SNP, and Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, announced that he would block Jeremy Corbyn, who was his predecessor, from running as a Labour candidate in the next general election. And this was seized upon by The Economist and by others to announce that the age of populism and political turbulence in Britain over the last decade was coming to an end. We're now going back to sensible politics, managerial competence rather than populist sloganeering, and so on. And they clearly welcomed what they saw as this development. Now, the big problem with that, without even getting on to the way in which it misrepresents both Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon and the respective political movements associated with them, the big problem with this idea of the great moderation is the Conservative Party, which is still in government. It's doing very badly in the polls at the moment, but still has its hands on the levers of political power. And just in the last couple of weeks, the Conservative Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has brought forward yet another piece of legislation targeting immigrants and refugees, trying to make it impossible for people who have entered the country illegally to claim asylum. And at the same time, they're making it virtually impossible for people to enter the country legally, so that it's a catch-22 situation. And at the same time, she went on a widely publicized trip to Rwanda to showcase the center that is being set up there for refugees who come to Britain. She wants them to be sent there instead. It's the nearest thing they can get to the Australian system of taking people and marooning them on Pacific Islands. There's a real fixation on the British right with what they call Australian-style immigration system, and this is the nearest thing that she can get to it, to send people off to Rwanda to the tender care of Paul Kagame. So the sense that British politics was entering a great moderation totally ignores and overlooks that. And what it really means is that there is no longer a challenge to the British political and economic status quo from the left. And that's what The Economist and others are celebrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's disturbing to see that, because if it's a moderation would mean, as you say, that, oh, the right is becoming a little bit less extreme, so we don't need to have as much of a watchful eye on it, or at least that's the implication of like that moniker and that piece. But the reality, as you say, is that both in the UK and throughout the world, the right is only becoming more emboldened, particularly when it comes to trans issues, LGBTQ abuses and discrimination, and across nations when it comes to refugees and immigrants. I mean, we're seeing that in Italy with Meloni, and as you say, in the UK as well. So it's almost like it's not wish fulfillment, but it's misrepresenting the problem in service of like justifying the expulsion of more progressive members from Labour and that coalition.
Yes, absolutely. It's no exaggeration to say, I think, that people such as The Economist and people representing that position in the commentariat would like the political spectrum to go, in terms of France today, for example, from Emmanuel Macron to Marine Le Pen. So an increasingly authoritarian right-leaning centre, which is carrying out all kinds of discriminatory policies against ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and at the same time trying to strip people of their rights, as Macron is doing at the moment. And then an ultra-nationalist, demagogic, populist far right as the only challenger to that, and as a kind of bogeyman that you can wave in people's faces and say, well, you have to vote for Macron or whatever the local equivalent of a politician such as Macron might be, because you have to keep out the far right. He is the lesser evil. And what they want to exclude is any kind of, however moderate, left-wing alternative to the status quo. Now, in terms of Britain, the status quo means, in practical terms, wage stagnation reaching on from almost 20 years. Since the crisis of 2008, there has been no wage growth for British workers, and it's predicted that this will continue well into the latter part of this decade. So people in real terms will not have received a rise since 2007, 2008. And when people talk about the political turbulence of the last decade as if it was some kind of eruption of madness, something totally inexplicable and unforeseeable, that kind of material foundation for political turbulence is something that they entirely ignore, because it is a product of the British economic model. It's not a dysfunction of that model, it's a feature, not a bug. The Thatcher economic model that was put in place in the 1980s, which was turbocharged then after the great financial crisis with a decade of austerity, that is the way it's meant to work. It's meant to keep the working class on their knees. It's meant to keep organised labour shut out of any capacity to represent people's rights. And it's inevitable that you will get turbulence in that kind of situation. And there was a challenge to that over the last decade, which took two different forms, but they had certain features in common. There was the Scottish independence movement in the middle part of the decade, and then there was the mobilisation in the Labour Party around Jeremy Corbyn. The Scottish independence campaign, when they had a referendum on independence in 2014, did take the form of an anti-austerity social movement. It mobilised a very large section of people. There was a very high turnout, comparatively speaking, in working class council estates where normally people wouldn't be engaged with conventional politics or conventional elections. There was a turnout of about 85% in that referendum, which is much higher than you'd get in general elections. And people were clearly voting against the British status quo. They were voting against the model of Thatcher and indeed the model of Tony Blair. There was an opposition to war in the Middle East, as well as opposition to austerity and privatisation on the home front. And that was really what lifted the Scottish National Party up to its position of hegemony in Scottish politics. The following year, you had the breakthrough in the Labour Party by Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters, which took everyone by surprise, including the Labour left themselves. And they subsequently went on to perform very well in the 2017 general election, not enough to overtake the Tories, but enough to deprive them of their majority. So they were both drawing on similar energies, albeit the fact that Sturgeon and Corbyn were very different politicians. Sturgeon, in terms of her personal politics and instincts, was much more of a liberal centrist figure. She had much more in common with someone like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand than with Bernie Sanders or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, whereas Corbyn was very much in that mold of left-wing, anti-austerity, anti-establishment politics that we saw over the last decade.
Well, and I want to return to Sturgeon in a second, but I just wanted to flesh out what really, happened in the wake of Corbyn's loss and what Labour actually took from that. I mean, do you think that they saw that as an opportunity to then ramp up this campaign of smears of anti-Semitism, because the loss was an opportunity to say, hey, we tried it. We tried it, young, liberal base that was in favor of Corbyn. We tried putting him out to represent the party, and now it's time to crack the whip, so to speak, and get the party back in line. How do you? I mean, there's the Panorama report that you write about. For people that may not be familiar, can you speak about what that looked like in the wake of his loss, and how Labour responded with these kinds of materials to justify kicking him out?
Yes, to begin with, the thing you have to recognise about the internal politics of the British Labour Party is that there's a profound ideological divide there. It's not just a question of tactics or pragmatism. People think one strategy will work better than the other. People have diametrically opposed goals. The gap is as wide as in the Democratic Party in the US between someone like Joe Manchin on the one hand and Rashida Tlaib or Bernie Sanders on the other. And the right-wing tendency of the Labour Party, which was dominant before Corbyn became leader in 2015, and which still controlled much of the party apparatus and the parliamentary group in Westminster, was adamantly opposed to Corbyn on grounds of principle, to the extent that they would prefer a Conservative government to one led by Corbyn or any other politician for the left. It wasn't just a personal animosity towards Corbyn, it was about the policies and the principles that he represented. And they put that vision into practice, especially after the 2017 general election, because you found before that, the argument against Corbyn is normally pitched in terms of pragmatism. People would say, he's a good man, but he's not a leader. And that seemed to be the case, judging by Labour's polling figures, but they surprised everyone. They gained 10% of the vote, which was the biggest step forward by any of the major parties in Britain since the Second World War. And afterwards, turning on a dime, the argument became, well, he may be a leader, but he's not a good man. Instead of saying he can't become prime minister, they said, well, perhaps he can become prime minister, but he shouldn't be allowed to become prime minister. And none of this is concealed, by the way. It's not a question of inferring it from people's behavior. It's all on the record. There was a book published by two journalists from the Sunday Times, a conservative newspaper called Gabriel Pogrund and Patrick Maguire, in which they quoted chapter and verse from leading figures on the Labour right, including the deputy leader under Corbyn, Tom Watson, explaining that all through that period, 2017, 2018, 2019, they were doing everything in their power to undermine his leadership and to make it impossible for Labour to win a general election and indeed to function at all as a political party. Now, this is where the allegations of anti-Semitism come into play. It's something that, again, people should be able to understand, I think, from the American context by looking at the attacks that are made on politicians like Rashida Tlaib, like Ilhan Omar, when they're accused of being anti-Semitic. It's not simply an empirical question where certain allegations are made and you can see whether those allegations are true or false. It's also a conceptual argument about what qualifies as anti-Semitism in the first place. There is a very widespread argument that the dominant form of contemporary anti-Semitism expresses itself through attitudes to Israel. And you can only really respond to that argument when you see specific examples people give of speech about Israel that they consider to be anti-Semitic. So in the context of the British Labour Party, for example, when Labour members waved Palestinian flags at the party conference, that was said to be anti-Semitic. When Labour MPs described Israeli rule over the Palestinians as a form of apartheid, that was said to be anti-Semitic. Support for the BDS campaign was said to be anti-Semitic. Again and again and again, allegations of anti-Semitism against Corbyn or against his supporters turned out on closer inspection to concern what they had said about Israel and their positions towards Israel. Now, this was embellished by, as you referred to there, the Panorama documentary. To put this in context, Panorama is a long-running documentary slot on the BBC, which is by far the most trusted source of news and current affairs in Britain. If you look at the opinion polls that are taken, people trust the BBC far more than any print newspapers or any other broadcaster. And this documentary slot was given over to a very partisan ideological journalist called John Ware, who made no bones about his hostility to Corbyn. And he produced a documentary where he claimed that Corbyn and his allies in the leadership were systematically thwarting efforts to expel people or discipline people with anti-Semitic views from the Labour Party. This was broadcast in the summer of 2019, just months ahead of a general election. It was political dynamite. It dominated the news cycle for weeks at a time. And it is still being referred to as damning proof of what a pernicious figure Corbyn was. Now, this documentary the claims that it made, the narrative that it put forward, was categorically untrue. And we know this because, among other things, Keir Starmer, after taking over from Corbyn, commissioned a lawyer called Martin Ford to produce a report on the Labour Party's internal culture under Corbyn. Ford produced his report finally last summer, and Starmer accepted that report in public without any criticisms or reservations, although he clearly had no intention of acting upon it. And Martin Ford said specifically that the version of events put forward in this documentary and in other media reports at that time was wholly misleading. That was the phrase that he used. He didn't say it was mistaken or inaccurate in this or that detail. He said the whole narrative was wholly misleading. In fact, it was the exact opposite of the truth. What had happened was that his principal, John Ware, the documentary maker, his principal eyewitnesses in this documentary, they had been working for the Labour Party's disciplinary unit, and they had specifically asked the leader's office to get involved and to offer their advice on particular cases. They refused to act until they had this advice. Martin Ford looked at the email exchanges and said this advice was offered in good faith, it was reasonable, it was welcomed by these officials, and they subsequently claimed on national television that they had been put under intense pressure to let people with anti-Semitic views off the hook, which was demonstrably untrue. And it really was part of an exercise in factional warfare. The very same officials we know from their WhatsApp conversations and email exchanges and so on, which is all in the public domain, they were desperately hoping for a Conservative Party landslide in the 2017 general election. And on the night of the election, when Labour had made unprecedented gains, they described their own reaction to that as being depressed, in a mood of utter despondency and gloom. A week later, they were still describing themselves as going through a kind of post-traumatic stress, just thinking about the fact that their party had gained 10% of the vote instead of being heavily defeated. And it may seem extraordinary that they would go on national television and make claims that were demonstrably untrue about such a serious matter, but looking at Martin Ford's report and looking at the other evidence, there's no other conclusion that we can draw. So this kind of allegation, this kind of narrative is what was put forward to say that Corbyn was not only unsuitable to be leader on grounds of competence or grounds of personal ability, but he was also morally unsuitable to be the party leader, let alone British Prime Minister. And it was demonstrably untrue.
Yeah, and I mean, as you say, there's a lot of connections you can draw to the U.S., but the purging of the Democratic Party of pro-Palestinian voices, it's helpful to as a shortcut to expelling progressives more broadly. Like, do you see that as similar in the UK context, that being anti-apartheid, anti-Israeli apartheid is kind of a harbinger for broader progressive values in the UK, and that's basically why Starmer and others are hooking on to this as a way to kind of reshape the Labour Party in the way that is more pro-corporate and more back in line with what it was, say, a decade ago?
Yes, I would definitely see it in those terms, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Israel and Palestine can be seen as a proxy for a much wider set of issues, because people who support Palestinian rights and condemn what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, and most importantly of all, back up that position with calls for practical action. People who take that position also tend to have critical, heterodox views on the whole range of British foreign policy and US foreign policy. And I would say that to a large extent, the attacks on Corbyn over his views on Palestine was a proxy for his views on Iraq, because the whole Labour Party establishment in the early part of this century was implicated in the Iraq war and the occupation and all the catastrophic results that followed. Not just people who served at cabinet level under Blair, but also people who were backbench MPs at the time and who voted in favour of invading Iraq. And they must at all costs exclude the idea that the invasion of Iraq was a fundamentally criminal enterprise. They can say in hindsight that it was mistaken, that mistakes were made and so on, although the nature of those mistakes is usually defined in extremely vague terms. But if someone says that the invasion and occupation of Iraq was a criminal enterprise from start to finish, from top to bottom, that implicates so much of the Labour Party apparatus and establishment that it has to be locked out at all costs. And Corbyn was unacceptable because he had always opposed the Iraq war, not on grounds of pragmatism, not because it wasn't supported by this or that country at the UN, but because he identified the core of what it was about. It was an exercise in crude imperialism and a bid for domination in the Middle East. And so the convenience of branding critical views towards Israel as being anti-Semitic is, as you say, that it can be used as a brush to tar all kinds of other views. And you saw this and still do see it being used in a much wider sense, where people will not only refer, I'm talking about mainstream commentators here, people who write for liberal newspapers in Britain, they'll not only refer to critical views of Israel as being anti-Semitic, they also refer to critical views of capitalism as being anti-Semitic. It's an extraordinary
They're relying on the
mental gymnastics where...
Yeah. Well, it's also just this, they're relying on the lowest common denominator as, and extrapolating it more broadly. Like, we all know the phrase that anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools, but that's not socialism. It's just the socialism of fools. But it's a way to protect, obviously, as you say, capitalism.
Yeah, it's precisely that kind of argument where, because, as we know, anti-Semites too spread all kinds of pernicious conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the financial system and controlling the banks and so on. Therefore, anyone who talks critically about the banks and about financial elites must be expressing coded anti-Semitism, when in the majority of cases they're simply talking about the banks.
Yeah.
They're talking about the disproportionate power of financial elites, and there's no trace of anti-Semitism. Of course, you can't talk about anything that's happened in the last 15 or 20 years without talking critically about the banks and the power of the financial system and the people who control it. And by denying people the ability to talk about that critically and rationally and realistically, you're actually driving them towards these kind of conspiracy theories instead.
Agreed. Two more questions and then I'll let you go. I mean, where is Sturgeon in all of this as well? I mean, how did they did they apply some of the same tactics to her, or no? As who you spoke about earlier, leader of the Scottish National Party, more center left, and not to the Corbyn's kind of extent. But how did that go down?
So Sturgeon took over the party leadership just after the referendum in 2014. It was a smooth succession. After Alex Salmond, the previous party leader, stepped down, there was no leadership contest. And she led them into the 2015 general election, where the SNP swept the board in Scotland. They took 50% of the vote. They won almost every Westminster constituency. And at that time, there was a lot of hostility to Sturgeon in the English media, not so much in the Scottish media, because Rupert Murdoch's newspaper, The Sun, has an English edition and a Scottish edition. And their Scottish edition actually called for an SNP vote when their English edition was presenting Sturgeon as this kind of sinister extremist who was going to break up the UK. One of the attack lines used against Ed Miliband, who was the Labour leader at that time, was that he would rely on the SNP at Westminster for support. The Tories had an election poster that depicted Miliband as being in the pocket, literally in the pocket of Alex Salmond. So there was a lot of that at the time. But then from the summer of 2015, Corbyn took over as the bogeyman figure in the eyes of the British media, because he had the potential to become Britain's Prime Minister in the way that Nicola Sturgeon obviously did not. Her party could only win support in Scotland, whereas the Labour Party had the potential to win support across the whole of Britain. And it was only after the 2019 general election, when Corbyn stepped down, was replaced by Starmer, Starmer carried out a very effective to date purge of the left from any position of influence and the policies associated with Corbyn from the Labour Party. So in a sense, Sturgeon and the SNP were the last significant threat left standing in mainstream politics. They were still pressing for a second referendum on Scottish independence because they were in a difficult position. Although they won again the vast majority of Westminster seats in 2019, although they won the Scottish Parliament election again in 2021, for the third election in a row in 2021, there was a majority in the Scottish Parliament of parties in favour of independence. And yet there was no obvious channel or mechanism to call a second referendum on independence. There was nothing in the British Constitution or the law for devolution of power to Scotland that said they had to call a second referendum. The first referendum back in 2014, that was the result of an agreement between Alex Salmond, who was then the SNP leader, and David Cameron, who was the Tory Prime Minister. Both Salmond and Cameron, for their own separate reasons, thought that it was to their advantage to call that referendum. Now Sturgeon found herself effectively banging her head against a brick wall, where she called for a second referendum, and there were polls all through 2020 and 2021 frequently showing majorities of Scots in favour of independence. And yet Boris Johnson's government simply said, no, we're not going to call a referendum. As far as we're concerned, this issue is off the table for a generation. And Sturgeon had no legal or mainstream constitutional mechanism to change that. She had ruled out going down the road of the Catalan independence movement, where they were denied permission to hold a legal referendum by Madrid, so they went ahead and held an unauthorized referendum. She ruled that out. So she was effectively in a very difficult position. And in the final year of her leadership, she did get a small taste of the tactics that were used against Corbyn, except instead of being accused of anti-Semitism, the wedge issue that they chose for this was trans rights. In the 2021 Scottish Parliament election, the SNP had promised to reform the law on gender recognition. So did the Greens, so did Labour and the Lib Dems. Between them, those four parties won 3/4 of all the seats at Holyrood. So there was a clear public mandate for the reform that transcended divisions over unionism versus nationalism in Scottish politics. In fact, the Tory party, when Theresa May was Prime Minister, had been bringing forward proposals for reform of the legislation on gender recognition as well. Boris Johnson subsequently scrapped that because he saw this evidently as an opportunity to engage in a culture war issue, targeting a minority and distracting people from the abject failure of his government and his party when it comes to economic issues and people's living standards. So this was the point of attack that was chosen over the last year by the Tory government against the SNP when they brought through, with a decisive majority in the Scottish Parliament, this new law on gender recognition. The government of Rishi Sunak in London intervened to veto this. This was the very first time since the Scottish Parliament was set up in the late 90s that they used the clause in the Act which gave them the power of veto. And for a brief moment, I think Nicola Sturgeon was getting a taste of the treatment that had been meted out to left-wing politicians like Corbyn, where she was being attacked by people who had themselves a track record of misogyny, both in their personal and political lives, and accused of betraying women and betraying women's rights. And I think this was something that must have factored into her decision to step down when she did. There was reason enough for her to step down in the fact that she had simply been in that position for a long time. She had been the party leader for the best part of 9 years. She had been in frontline politics ever since she was elected to the Scottish Parliament back in 1999. So on a personal level, you could understand why people would want to take a break, and you could also understand why she would feel that her strategy for independence had run into this deadlock, and she would want to pass on the baton to someone else to see if they could take things forward. But I think it was also very significant that she was being targeted in this way, And it was almost like a shot across the bows from the British establishment, as if they were saying to her, you've seen what we've done to other people, and this is what we could do to you if we put our mind to it. So I don't find it surprising in that sense that she decided to bow out before getting the full taste of the treatment that has been meted out to politicians like Corbyn.
Well, this was very informative and helpful. I wish we had more time. Daniel Finn, features editor at Jacobin, author of One Man's Terrorist, A Political History of the IRA. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Of course. All right, guys, we are going to head into the fun half. The number is 646-257-3920. RIMs are broken. Like, I don't know what's going on, but they froze basically at the start of the show, and then they aren't coming back. And I tried to refresh, then I lost all of them. But I did see an IM that I just wanted to respond to really quickly because I didn't want, like, they actually are broken. But I felt like people might be like, you're dodging this. I'm not. So I saw that my dear friend Anna Kasparian kind of went viral with a tweet. And some people wanted me to weigh in on it. And I just, like, look, she, as I said, dear friend of mine, really good person. I don't think she's anti-trans. I don't think that's really even a question. She has a long track record in this space. And I think her track record should speak for itself. She's been in this space for a long period of time and has done a ton of great work. However, like, I really do disagree with the emphasis. Like, I think it's wrong to overinflate the usage of kind of awkward language like birthing person, both in frequency and in terms of the stakes involved when someone is referred to by that language, because it's awkward. I get it. It's stilted when being used in non-medical or technical terms, but I think that's, like, kind of the extent of the critique, right? It's awkward. It doesn't take away anyone's rights, and it's not when being used right now in that context, it's not taking away anyone's rights. And, like, as a cis woman myself, I just think it's more important to put into context that, like, while you might not enjoy the technical language, that awkwardness is inevitable in this current climate and necessary because we're trying to, like, fortify walls right now as trans erasure is widespread right now. Like, there's a barrage of deliberately trans exclusionary language, which is what some of the awkward, stilted terminology is meaning to beat back. And that trans exclusionary language is really just the tip of the iceberg for systemic erasure. So being diligent about combating that, I mean, that's at the forefront of my mind. So, like, again, I've tried to say this before. From my point of view, so much of what we do in this business, very small business, and I will reiterate that, like, Anna, in my opinion, is one of the very few good ones. But we have a disagreement here. Like, it's just so much of what we do isn't just how we cover something, it's what we cover, it's story selection, it's what we emphasize. And anyone in private has the right to have preferences about how they want to be identified. But in my position, member of the media, member of the left, the progressive left, being kind of spokespeople for the progressive left in an online media space, I just think we have a greater responsibility. And the assertion that someone wants to just be called a woman in, like, an individualized, atomized context is completely fair. But within the context of larger anti-trans panic and hundreds of bills on the state level targeting trans people, like, I try to bring a certain amount of awareness about how my statements are going to be taken, and I think it's obtuse to skirt around the context, right? So that's my take on that. But I just wanted to address that because even though the IMs are broken, I did see the IM, and I didn't want, people to be upset to think I was dodging anything.
Yeah, it would have people would have immediately said that. I mean, yeah, just like some of the context. Human Rights Campaign warns that yesterday that 50% of transgender youth in America could lose access to gender-affirming primary care thanks to new laws from state legislatures across the country. And the truth is that non-binary and trans people get pregnant. And like, how do you address that in language? Like, that's actually a language problem.
Yeah.
And like, to me, like, I think like, okay, like clinical language might be like sort of awkward, but it's also awkward to be a trans and non-binary person in this sort of context and try to go through a pregnancy and that sort of care. So I think like it's the answer to this sort of thing, which is not much different than when Jordan Peterson was talking about it, which is like, actually we're these sort of guidances, like when the CDC still references people as women, but it also includes this other language too for these, you know, rarer cases. And I think like that's just all this is. I don't think there's anything deeper to it.
All right, we want to bring in Binder and Brandon. But on ESPN, check us out, youtube.com/ESPN show. We gave a full breakdown of week 1 in free agency. We spoke about March Madness, the upsets, Aaron Rodgers drama unpacked, and more. youtube.com/ESPN show. And Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning, we had Danny Bessner on to talk about Iraq, and we're also going to be talking to that about that with Jean Bajalan, who was in the area, in the region, in Kurdistan, I believe, during 2004-2005, also was taught in the area, and also looking back on Hitchens' selling of the war, and why the sort of Kurdish sort of angle of that, like we got to help the Kurds, like the sort of limitations and I guess the final referendum on how did that work out. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Hello.
What's happening on the discourse, Brandon?
Well, we'll have a new episode for you out early this weekend, early next week or this weekend. I'm a little busy with some personal matters, but we are desperate to talk about the crackdown on crypto and possibly the arrest of our former president, Donald J. Trump.
I mean, is that even happening? Do we even know if he's getting arrested?
Well,
I mean, it said that Bragg says it's likely, but it's just hilarious that.
And Trump has seemed afraid, but he also raised a lot of money in the past week.
Yeah, the blurred lines between legal defense fund and fundraising operation are really benefiting him.
It's a win-win.
So the grand jury was supposed to meet yesterday, but they didn't, and they're meeting today. But they might have another witness. So like.
No, they were also supposed to meet today, and that's not happening now either.
Oh, they're not doing it either today. So when did I don't know where Trump got Tuesday from.
I don't know either.
Or maybe I
don't know either. We lost Brandon.
Lost Brandon.
The Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg sent out a letter to Republicans in Congress today, basically saying, "Why did you you're asking information based on Donald Trump believing he was going to be indicted on Tuesday? No information has come from our office whatsoever about this. So there's nothing to provide you with."
Sounds like a humble brag.
What's happening on Doomed and Scam Economy?
Sure. So on Doomed last night, Lance from the Surfs joined me to discuss exactly that, the arrest of Donald J. Trump. Really what we spoke about more broadly was what actually did he do? And of course, how this country views the very worst thing you can possibly do, and that's breaking campaign finance laws. Nothing's worse than that, apparently. We also discussed basically how the right was reacting, how his supporters were reacting, and then we got into a broader discussion about AI based on those AI photos of Trump being arrested that was actually tricking people into believing that they were real. People saw AI photos, photos made with AI
of him running
Donald
from
Trump.
The cops.
Yeah, and
best use of AI so far.
People were legitimately obviously not people involved in politics, but just people browsing through and who follow their favorite Twitter sports pages and stuff, they were seeing this and they thought it was legit.
I saw some libertarian be like, how can people like protest police brutality and then celebrate this? And
Oh my God.
running away from cops with billy clubs.
Yeah, he's missing a hand in one of them, so it's just like, let's not go crazy about the dangers of this kind of stuff. It's,
In one of them, the AI obviously misunderstood the prompt, and one of them gave Trump a billy club as well.
he took it. He took it from the cop, right? I mean, escape opportunity.
Right. And then on Scam Economy, which will be released on... so you can check that out at youtube.com/MattBinder, and it'll be up today at doomthecast.com. And then Sunday, the latest episode of Scam Economy will drop. And I spoke with Jackie Sawicki. She's the founder of Concerned Citizens of Navarro County and a member of the National Coalition Against Crypto Mining, to discuss what happened to her small rural Texas town when one of the biggest Bitcoin mining companies moved in. It's a very interesting discussion. Definitely check that out. It's been happening to communities really all across the country. These Bitcoin mining companies come in and they convince local politicians to give them these sweetheart deals. And they end up making more off of those government deals than they do actually mining Bitcoin. So definitely check that out. That'll go up at youtube.com/MattBinder and at scameconomy.com.
All right. The number is 646-257-3920. We'll be taking your calls. I am still broken. I'm sorry, guys. We're trying to get it fixed on our end. But we'll take your calls for sure. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflakes has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back on the Majority Report. The number is 646-257-3920. I am turning off the voicemail. Again, no IMs right now, unfortunately.
I believe,
sad.
are we not going out on the app either? Is there a problem with the app? Maybe. Sorry, folks. There's something down with the server.
Oh, damn.
There are problems all over the place today. It's crazy.
Well, I'm not seeing calls, and that's a problem too.
Oh, well, that's probably, it's all related. It's all in the same system.
The Matrix has finally come for us.
Oh, wait,
I
no, the
see calls
voicemails.
coming in.
Now, I turned off the. Now we get calls. We get calls. All right,
Okay.
Calls are working, and with that, we'll take a call right off the bat. Calling from a 928 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Brian from Flagstaff. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, I'm watching on TV and it's making me throw me off a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so you had that guy on yesterday from Ohio about the guns and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we had him on. I would say he called in, and that was that.
And we indulged him, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that guy. I mean, yeah, that was a weird call, but the problem is that America cannot get rid of its guns yet. I mean, New Zealand had that big, the AR shoot up, and then they got rid of the ARs the next day. Well, America just cannot do that yet.
Yeah.
Because we're still kind of at war in the Civil War thing. That never got settled.
I mean, I don't know.
That's the way.
I think it's even goes far. I mean, this is, a very gun heavy country even before the Civil War. You have the leather stocking myth of oh, look at the guy with the white guy who knows the Indians trick, sort of environmental savvy, but he has a rifle. This
Last
is
of the
ingrained.
Mohicans?
Last of the Mohicans, yeah.
I mean, that's that myth. Then,
That's that
right?
myth, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so this country was in part conquered with rifle and guns, and so I mean, not that I think it wasn't helpful for Anglo colonization of say New Zealand or Australia, but it's I think it is. I do think it'd be difficult to do a compulsory forced gun buyback in this country compared to New Zealand. It's slightly different feasibility there.
But my proposal is always just make it pretty lucrative, like four times what you paid for it, 5 times what you paid for it, and do your best on that front.
But I mean, even still, like that guy yesterday, he's not going to give up his gun, even if you paid him 10 times.
Maybe
he's got some, But I mean, the Civil War for America, that's pretty fresh. That's only 160 years now.
Yeah.
That's right around the corner. So I mean, it's not like that wound has been healed at all. And those people, they took all their
yes.
Well, they took all their muskets back down into the South and then never assimilated. And I mean, when me and Sam were young, this saying was all the time. I heard this: the South is going to rise again. I don't hear that anymore. Nobody hears that anymore
because now
they've
got to fight
risen
wokeness.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And they changed what the words are. Antifa means anti-fascist, but it's some kind of terrorist organization.
Well,
and Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter. You know what I mean?
Right, but then it just means scary. There's a lot of different ways that the right has gone around saying blackness or the N-word, and they have a lot of different dog whistles for that.
Oh yeah, but I mean, wokeness. What is that? I mean, not being asleep. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different things, and I think that we need a third Reconstruction. You guys had something about that on. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The second Reconstruction made a lot of sense, but they always fight back and say, "Oh, well, they're just getting too many rights."
Right.
And then they take away the voting rights. It's just really it's blatant, and we need to fix that. And there is no middle ground. I don't understand why people say that they're kind of conservative and kind of liberal. It's one or the other. It's black and white, I think. Don't you?
No. I think Matt made a good point about manifest destiny and the origins of America. And I think that it's key to understand that Americans and America itself, part of our myth is that we're a country always under threat. And a lot of people embody that personally, as we are a very individualistic country, they think of themselves as always under threat from both interpersonal and also international sources. And so it's easy for you to draw a through line from America's wiping, genociding the Plains Indians across the country to finally make room for, I don't know, more Walmarts, to slavery, to even like the early 2000s Islamophobia craze that resulted after 9/11, and see that there's just always been a new threat in this country to sort of justify having not just like a militarized police force, but militarizing your own homes. And obviously people make money off of that, so it's always been very lucrative, but there is just a part of the American mentality that is just like paranoia. It's paranoia. We're always under threat. It's a sort of an egotistic paranoia. We're a shining city on a hill, and so people definitely want to come kill us. It's why we were told people did 9/11. Like, there's just a version of American individualism that is, steeped in like, we just got to protect ourselves because people are going to be looking at us for everything and how good we are, and they're going to want to kill us, and not engaging with even at the interpersonal level, why someone might just want to rob your house. Like, someone says like, you don't have a right to my property, but that's fine. You're right. No one has a right to your property, whatever, but engage with why someone might want to rob your house, not just the idea of like your stuff is personally so nice and all of your your family stuff, but like someone clearly is not getting what they need and they have to commit crimes, but we just we justify it as just like there's just evil people out there who need to be shot.
Yeah, I mean, look, 100 years before the founding, there was the Salem witch hunts. Like, this sort of thing is pretty typical of reaction.
But even the Salem witch hunts, that's by the conservatives, the people that are the
that's
religious right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean, the borders is what you're talking about. I mean, kind of what you're talking about. And I live in Arizona, where I live with Navajos and Apaches and Sioux. I mean, I know all these tribes, and I understand what you're saying about the Plains Indians. But I mean, I just don't have a problem with them. It's the right that has the problem with them, and the borders and the black people.
I hear you, Brian.
Right? That's their conception of America.
Yes, right. They have a white supremacist conception of America, and you don't. I think that's what it boils down to, Brian. Thanks for the call.
But all right, hey, thanks for taking my call. You guys are doing a great job. Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, let's do a clip, shall we, friends? What you want to do this Tucker thing, or maybe we should Russell Brand, Charlie Kirk. I mean, we've got
my heart. I don't know if we have a good Russell Brand one, but
no more British comedians.
Can't do the
let's
Russell
put a moratorium
thing?
on that.
You don't want to do the Russell?
I haven't seen it. What's the new Russell Brand?
I thought you would be into it.
We can do it. I mean, I've just done so much on him, and it's just sad. But
okay.
This is his most disgusting one yet. I hear that he defends get him to the Greek. Ugh,
I thought that was good when I was.
Get Him to the Greek's a good
17.
movie. What are you talking about?
I like Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
The sequence where Jonah Hill puts the heroin up his butt is really funny. I really like that one. But
honestly, that was just the first Russell Brand movie that came to mind. That's why I used that one. I have no real opinion on the movie.
It's good. It's good. Unfortunately, that's what sucks. Part of what sucks about Russell Brand going down this path is that he's done some really good work, in my opinion, in the past. I've seen him do stand-up live. Will not be doing that now because he's gone full rumble-pilled. He has some relationship with this venture capital Peter Thielite-backed platform. He's got a show on it. And called Stay Free, with a damn freaking like COVID-esque virus logo behind it. My God. Mm-hmm. Here he is speaking about free speech. What else? And he encourages his viewers to go to Rumble because some of what he says, or he wants to say, he cannot say on YouTube.
And it brings about important questions, and these are the ones that I want you to answer. I want you to ponder along with us and then answer. Who has the authority? It's the same with free speech. If you don't agree with the principle of free speech, you have to conclude that there's some group, individual, or institution that has the authority to deny you your free speech. Who are you giving that authority to? Once our trust in institutions like government, media, and the corporate world has broken down, and I'm pretty sure that's where we are, then none of us are granting that consent are we? So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. Also, we're talking to Glenn Greenwald. What an exciting conversation to be having at this time. Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, radical advocate for free speech, radical critic of all political corruption wherever it's found, newly confronted continually by his old liberal establishment pals. Not that the liberal establishment would have ever been Greenwald's pals, but they've turned on him, haven't they?
Certainly
He's someone that faces a lot of attacks. He's a brilliant journalist. He's our friend over here on Rumble. We're honoured to have him. And then once we flip off of YouTube, we'll be talking about censorship that so-called journalist, Matt Taibbi, talks about, like some vaccine side effect stuff that we just wouldn't be able to talk about on YouTube. On our item, here's the news. We're talking about January the 6th. You're going to absolutely...
Okay, so we're talking COVID, January 6th, free speech. I mean, hey, when are we going to be talking about critical race theory, Russell?
I just like that he also...
Yeah, okay. No, go ahead, Bradley.
No, I was just saying I like that. I like that he goes like, yeah, we'll get off just to talk about some, some back side effect stuff. Like very, very like offhand, like,
But this is
gotta get off YouTube so we can talk about some
This is the model that we've spoken about with the Daily Wire, with the Crowder Mug Club, which is, they are different people in front of the paywall and behind the paywall, and it's all a funnel system. They go to YouTube, which has a broader audience, obviously, and this is also why Glenn's constantly tweeting about, sanctimonious liberals with as many adjectives as he can fit into his tweet, because that's PR for getting behind the paywall. And the reason they're having this conversation, Russell and Glenn Greenwald, is because they're all being paid by the same corporate media daddy at the head of Rumble. And so with all the talk about...
I have to jump in there because Glenn is pretty
he's saying he's not getting
cagey
paid
about, the arrangement there. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly on all the promotional material.
I appreciate it. We don't know if he's getting paid, but they're both on Rumble, and you can draw your own conclusions.
Which is a corporate entity.
Yes.
I'm at the Rumble terms of service page right now, and I'm just looking through the content that you are under no circumstances shall the following content be submitted to the Rumble service. And I'm looking and I see content or material that is pornographic, obscene, or adult in nature, content or material that promotes, supports, or incites individuals or groups which engage in violence or unlawful acts, including but not limited to, and I've never seen this group named in any terms of service before, Antifa groups and persons affiliated with Antifa, and then the KKK and white supremacist groups and or persons affiliated with these groups. I mean, they have their own sort of content here. Can't put any content that libel or slanders anyone, which is very broadly defined, I guess, depending on where you are. So I don't know how they determine that. But this is the free speech haven that they are flocking to, right? All these sites, it's like any other of these sites. In fact, they're more restrictive.
I mean, this is the elite conception of free speech, which is that YouTube, instead of being sort of semi-responsible about what it lets go viral about, say, vaccine harms, which I would say are massively outweighed by the harms of the pandemic that Russell Brand has been downplaying. But that actually YouTube should be free, and that it's actually their free speech duty to monetize and carry all that stuff and let it go as viral as possible, even though there's a pandemic killing millions of people. Now, who is the correct response? I don't like Department of Homeland Security being involved in this, but I do think the CDC has some role to say like, hey, this is our best understanding of this novel virus right now. Here's some guidance about what you let go viral. And like I would say, this idea that like there's so-called true things about vaccine harms. I've talked about this with people before. There are like rare instances of vaccine harms, but there is an interest for these platforms not to let that stuff go viral because it creates an unwarranted impression about this actual public health problem that investors of things like Rumble want us to downplay. Go ahead.
And this is a very libertarian conception of free speech, one that is provided to the public through a filter of what the corporation wants to see. It's just that this corporation is friendly to us as opposed to the YouTube corporation, which is less friendly to us. Like, I mean, leftists have a broader conception of free speech, one that is more critical of, say, government censorship. You have the right to free speech under the First Amendment, but that does not preclude companies from having content moderation things. And like, it brings me back to, how the preponderance and the continued obsession with campus culture being authoritarian and cracking down on the free expression of thought, when in reality, all it is that the professors or the speakers at these colleges that want to be immune from criticism are pushing this idea because they're unable to win in the marketplace of ideas. Like, their ideas for young people are not winning the popular vote. So they've got to rig the marketplace in their favor by essentially claiming, hey, this is rigged against me. And so, like, that's kind of the shallowness of these arguments. Go ahead, Brandon.
No, I mean, I've yet to hear, and all the time that the free speech, the radical free speech right has been, trumpeting this argument online, because it's always online. Like, I've yet to hear a compelling argument about like why YouTube is a free speech zone. Like, it doesn't make sense if you know how YouTube functions. It doesn't make sense if you know how they make their money. It doesn't make sense if you understand how ads work, if you understand how like subscribers work, if you understand how like an algorithm work. It just doesn't make any sense. And it always comes back to the same thing. People who are afraid of losing their status position, who have chosen to have careers that require you to work on a platform that is not your own, that you have no equity in, and therefore you have no way to like affect content moderation rules except for in a very sort of like informal, vocal, like, idea spreading way. And B, the just complete fear of losing access to your, livelihood, which they kind of couple together with like a lazy understanding of like leftist ideals around like, economic freedom in terms of people shouldn't be, beholden to jobs. But it's all just like, no, you're running a business shoddily. You have a shoddy product, probably, especially considering a lot of the people who are promoting vaccine truths now were promoting ivermectin and promoting the cure of the weak because, the clout culture doesn't mix well with like science, because science can move slowly. Science requires a lot of, peer review, and clout culture moves very quickly. It's like, what can we talk about today? How can I be on the, the leading edge of this conversation, even if the work itself is not up to par? And from, just someone who watches a lot of like YouTube scam stuff, I don't think YouTube's content moderation is strong enough. That's why the SEC is sending out all these notices to people.
Yeah.
Because like, if you stop paying attention to people who want to push like vaccine skepticism online, or like just outright like Nazism, you see that there's a whole swaths of YouTube that is just like full of crimes, full of people pumping like, securities fraud, full of people like advocating for Ponzi schemes, like openly. YouTube does the very bare minimum of content moderation to keep itself out of trouble. And I think a lot of these people just don't like that this company is not going to put itself out for like, maybe if you were Kim Kardashian and it was Instagram will put itself out on the line for you. But, if you're not bringing in that level of attention to your site, like you're ultimately just, you're fungible, not to borrow that's a workplace word, but that's just, it is what it is.
And this is ultimately about marketing Rumble as this open place, as opposed to it's all overstated. And I've been got penalized by YouTube because of what it perceived as anti-vax stuff from us. And to me, it's like, yeah, that's like the position these anti-vax assholes have put this giant corporation in. And like, it's not true that you can't discuss this stuff at all. You just have to do it responsibly. And I think like that requirement isn't like so insane to me. And so like Dr. Susan Oliver is an example on YouTube who will talk about things like how rare these things are, but put in the context of a public health effort. And she doesn't go viral like charlatans that Russell prefers, like Brett Weinstein or Joe Rogan's freaks, because those people ultimately are harvesting anxiety. They're cultivating and harvesting anxiety for their own profit. And they're not, this idea that they're actually doing some sort of dispassionate, skeptical eye on the science is laughable to anybody who actually does that thing.
And just quickly, Brandon, to go off your point, because I didn't want to lose it. Like, they literally did, Twitter literally did this for Trump in the way you described the Kim Kardashian thing. We learned this through Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's questioning during these ridiculous congressional hearings, where they altered their terms of service multiple times to accommodate Trump, who had violated the terms of service because he was one of the most followed people on Twitter. People spoke about his tweets, and how he spoke off the cuff. He became synonymous with the brand and was bringing traffic to Twitter. The only time they flipped on it and ended up stopping accommodating him was when, January 6th happened.
I think it was Facebook where this came out, where they did a study to determine why more, right-wing users were being affected by its policies, were being subject to like bans or suspensions, and it's because they were the ones most likely to break Facebook's policies and rules and harass people and stuff. And then Facebook admitted basically that they pulled back on actually going through with their policies on these users because they were worried of the blowback from Republicans. They literally changed how they acted on their very own policies due to fear of blowback from right-wing politicians.
Well, I mean, they probably would have gotten blowback, but that's not the same thing as, protecting free speech. That's, I think same thing with Trump being left on Twitter. Some people would say, well, he's the president, so why, isn't it in the public interest to have, for him to have access to this platform? It's like, no, of course not. He has access to any platform he might want through multiple different channels because he is the president. This is just a craven business decision. And, I don't think it does anyone any favors. And it's definitely not a leftist position to pretend like private companies can be accountable to public ideals without actual regulation or enforcement. But it definitely soothes the ego if you are piggybacking off the Twitter platform to promote your business, to pretend like it can. But they'll turn your information over to the police with no warrant. We've seen that. And so that's just, to me, one reason you should not convince people this is a free speech platform. It's not the kind of platform you should be, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is let's just say coordinating activism in a way that is not, considerate that people will be looking into your DMs. It's not good to teach people that these sites are something that they're not,
Yeah.
I mean, and this is in the context of, TikTok CEO hauled in front of Congress today.
We'll get to that in a sec.
And you got Josh Hawley saying, what's he saying? He's red baiting Chuck Schumer as basically a Chinese Communist Party asset. And also Jamal Bowman, who said maybe they stopped short of saying we should ban TikTok, which I think look, I don't like any of these things spying on me, but I'll be honest, the Chinese spying on me is honestly less troubling to me than American governments and Peter Thiel's fucking weird ass spying on me, because that's more that's closer in proximity and can actually do something. So that's all this stuff about moderation is and de-amplifying fucking Alex Berenson is the threat to free speech, I think is a fucking joke.
Let's do this TikTok.
Come on.
So
where's that in the Constitution? That's not in the Constitution. That's not in the Bible. Come on.
Let's do this TikTok thing, Bradley. Yeah. Okay. So you guys have to look at this recent TikTok story within the context of a incredibly troubling bipartisan red baiting push. The Biden administration is as guilty as anyone, frankly, in this. So are Democrats like Chuck Schumer, whose pet project with the semiconductor bill he'd been working on it for a long period of time. And look, I'm super in favor of the United States onshoring its manufacturing and bringing some jobs back here. I'm not in favor of only seeing your ability to pass it through the context of the cynical context of being hawkish on China, which is exactly what Schumer did. It's exactly what Biden did when he signed it, feeding into this xenophobia, specifically from the right. Plus, Biden reopening all of these military bases in the Philippines, doing these deals with Australia so there's more military capacity for the United States on along China's borders. This is a real aggressive ramp up in order to use the United States' status as an empire and military might in order to ramp up this rivalry. And I fear it's going to have extreme consequences.
It will. I mean, this stuff always has, it always leads to xenophobia among the population. It's going to create more of that. Absolutely it will, especially when you have bipartisan support of this. And that's going to be the main.
Well, Fox is already running with it. Yeah. And here is Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers with the TikTok CEO who was brought in front of Congress. His name is Xu Zichu, speaking about, and again, this is feeding into larger just xenophobia about Asian people, and it's going to come home domestically. It already has. Trying to feed into the xenophobia about the Chinese government having investments in TikTok, as if that is so much worse than like the United States' incredibly friendly relationship with telecommunications companies, big tech, where our data is just passed back and forth like spit in a makeout between the government and these companies. But apparently it's China that's on the wrong side of this.
Elon Musk bought Twitter with funding not only from the big banks, but Saudi and Israel.
And they love Elon. Elon freed Twitter, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, baby.
That's called free market. That's called free market.
And can you say with 100% certainty that ByteDance or the CCP cannot use your company or its divisions to heed content to promote pro-CCP messages for an act of aggression against Taiwan?
We do not promote or remove content at the request of the Chinese government.
The question is,
we will replace.
The question is, are you 100% certain that they cannot use your company to promote such messages?
It is our commitment to this committee and all our users that we will keep this free from any manipulation by any government.
If you can't say 100% certain, I take that as a no. As I previously referenced, TikTok spied on American journalists. Can you say with 100% certainty that neither ByteDance nor TikTok employees can target other Americans with similar surveillance techniques?
Chair Rogers, I first of all disagree with the characterization that is spying. It was an internal investigation.
Yes or no? Can you do surveillance of other Americans?
We will protect the U.S. user data and fire it all from all unwanted foreign access. It's a commitment that we've given to the committee.
So I guess my question is, I wanted to hear you say with 100% certainty that neither ByteDance nor TikTok employees can target other Americans with similar surveillance techniques as you did with the journalists.
Again, I don't disagree with the characterization is surveillance, and we have given our commitments, Chair Rogers. The 4 commitments, I think it's our commitment that we will not be influenced by any government on these issues.
DOJ is investigating this surveillance right now. To the American people watching today,
oh God,
hear this: TikTok is a weapon by the Chinese Communist Party to spy on you, manipulate what you see, and exploit for future generations.
Yes.
A ban is only a short-term way to address TikTok, and a data privacy bill is the only way to stop TikTok from ever happening again in the United States.
Again, like
what about
TikTok from ever happening again?
Yeah.
She cannot.
Never again. Hashtag never again will you be doing the gritty on TikTok. Never again. It's for the communists,
Mukbang
bitch.
video. Let's be very clear. The commitment she wants Zichu to make about TikTok, she cannot make about Meta or Twitter.
Or the phones where you have TikTok on it, like Apple, where there's also a close relationship with the United States government.
Yeah.
Go on.
Like, no, that's the thing is like the reason you focus so much on the sort of jingoistic anti-China thing, and like I don't discount the idea that China would be doing this because this is what governments do with these sorts of things. But the answer isn't a specific sort of emergency effort against the sort of dastardly Chinese app. It's a broad protection of people's privacy from these sorts of apps generally. So like not only like they can't spy on TikTok, but okay, like say we ban TikTok, what are they going to do? Just buy all that shit that's on the secondhand spy market, like from Meta?
Yeah,
like that's like
replace it with the Shenyun app to challenge the China before communism party, right? That's what they want.
No, I mean
Amazon.
it's just such
Amazon just I think it was earlier this year. Admitted that they basically about a dozen pieces of footage from Ring cameras were handed over to law enforcement without informing the owner of that Ring camera that they handed over that data to law enforcement. I mean, I don't see that breach of privacy being discussed, and that's a much bigger breach of privacy than willingly using an app and knowing that you're uploading your content there for people to see. This is, every single one. There should be a sweeping, obviously, privacy law that addresses these companies, social media companies as a whole, that doesn't and internet companies as a whole, I should say, and that doesn't solely target one specific app for the reason of its perceived connection to China.
It's just such a, I have to agree with the representative from TikTok, even though I don't agree with their platform overall, not for the reasons characterized in this particular questioning, but he, of course he can't make that promise. And I don't know if that congressperson just doesn't know how like websites function, not just social media websites, but just like every website functions, but they're all stealing your data. Calling it surveillance is, true, but then you kind of have to admit that we're all being surveilled by, Facebook and Twitter and, your Movie Pass app and your Google Maps. And that's how, they knew who was exposed to the COVID pandemic. And it's just the trade-offs that we have made to be so plugged into this app based digital world, and our lawmakers only highlight it every so often, because the overall problematic nature of a lot of these things is evident once you realize that, like, if you aren't paying for the website, and sometimes even if you are, like on Twitter for like Twitter Blue, you're the product. You're what people are buying. Your data, your eyeballs, your attention is what people are buying, and convincing yourself otherwise, again, is not very helpful. And also, if you acknowledge that this is what these apps do, which is like take your data, run social experiments on you, sell your data, it starts to raise really interesting questions about the age limit for a lot of these apps. Like, should children be on social media? Should children be on apps that exist solely to capture their data and information in a sort of like social experimenty type of way that would otherwise require like parental sign off? Probably not. Maybe they shouldn't be on social media apps for just that particular reason. But, we've allowed our entire economy to be monetized this way. So you kind of just, if the Chinese government is using it to spread propaganda, they probably should be, because everyone else is. Not just governments, companies, they're all like trying to erode your attention span and get you to be a better consumer of propaganda, a better consumer of Pepsi products, better consumer of, anything.
Yeah,
these guys were literally out there just a few weeks ago thanking Elon Musk and Matt Taibbi and that Schellenberg guy for sharing private communications that were made between employees of Twitter. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
They haul Mark Zuckerberg into Congress on what feels like a biannual basis to ask him why Facebook is doing things that it's not allowed to do. And at the end of all of those, like congressional, I guess this is before Meta, and he burned $80 billion or whatever. And at the end of all those congressional meetings or hearings or whatever, with him being like, chewed up like the wad of, flavorless gum he seems to resemble sometimes. It's,
he's juicy
no one
fruit,
ever
chewed up juicy fruit.
No one ever puts two and two together that like maybe Facebook is only profitable when it breaks the rules. Maybe these aren't like externalities of their functions when he's capturing too much data or they're selling it to the quote unquote wrong people. Maybe this is just the economy of social media and it's the only way it can function. So, at a certain point, like, maybe it will have to become a free speech platform, because if it's not allowed to steal and sell your data to people who think it's meaningful, then it won't be able to support itself. It's just, it'll be taking more tax dollars in.
Reminds me of this Stuart Lee joke from 10 years ago. I hate Twitter. It's like state surveillance agency staffed by gullible volunteers.
I mean, and that's just like larger critique about social media. And hey, if you want to stay off of it, good for you. But let's not pretend like there's a massive difference between these social media platforms just because one comes out of China. You're feeding into racism. That's what you're doing. And like, this is every conservative critique of like any corporation, right? It's always about the bad corporation, and as long as we made it in our image, it would be good, as opposed to like systemic critique about the way society and capitalism is structured overall.
I mean, yeah, this is like, and just to like both sides a little bit, this is like kind of why, and while like I don't downplay like the idea that state powers intervene in our politics, like the Russiagate thing was too hyper focused on Russia when you should talk about, we should need to be reducing foreign influence on our elections entirely. Like Democratic majority for Israel should get the fuck out of here. Yeah, like and the Saudis, like and even fucking Erdogan, like that sort of thing is a problem. But when you focus it too narrowly, it's because it's a political project that is probably going to lead to like greater defense spending.
And also hate crimes domestically towards Chinese Americans, which have been ramping up under Trump and are going to keep doing it. And that is on, frankly, both Democrats and Republicans' hands in Congress and in the White House.
But Democrats should actually. This would be a great issue to stand up to Republicans on, and like push the broader, because we actually do need all these things to stop spying on us like this. Push broader. But if you save TikTok, I mean, you're going to sew up the youth vote.
I mean,
exceptionally.
yeah.
Like, don't kowtow
it's
to-
such a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Any Democrat that's sitting there feeding into this is a moron, an absolute moron.
All right, let's take a call here. Calling from a 202 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 202?
Hello. Hear me?
Hey.
Hi. Yes. This is Elena. I'm calling from Virginia.
Elena from Virginia. What's on your mind?
So, a political poll just came out. I believe this is from Big Village on the 2024 National Democratic Primary. Can you guess who wasn't included in the polling?
Who? Bernie Sanders?
Marianne Williamson.
Ah.
The only Democratic candidate that is officially running.
Mm-hmm.
So, here's my question. If independent media, which you are independent media, right?
Yes.
So if independent media believes itself to have this obligation, I think it's a righteous one, to tell the stories that the mainstream is deliberately and systematically suppressing. I just have to ask, like, when are you planning to bring Marianne Williamson to the show?
I mean, look, that's probably a little bit above my pay grade. I really only book on my days. Maybe I'll have her on. But I respect Marianne Williamson as a person. I like her. I think there are limits to her candidacy. It's not necessarily tethered to movements, labor in the way that I would like. Generally, I don't know. I think that her value is being overstated in the primary.
I mean, I just want to say quickly, like, I view our role in this as more defensive than offensive. I don't think independent media is a vanguard propelling somebody to the president's office, and I think it's a problem that people look at it that way. Like, if Bernie Sanders would have won the primaries, it would have been because of the coalition building among like progressive movements and unions. And to me, it's like, I'm kind of interested in Marianne, but it's also like there's things that I'm less intrigued about by Marianne as far as like a challenge candidacy. It's a downgrade from Bernie Sanders, just subjectively speaking. That doesn't mean I think you should attack it. That doesn't mean I think you should support it. But as far as like trying to like force it, like she's got to get buy-in with. She's got to create a movement. I don't think that starts primarily with YouTube. I think it starts with actual like organizers, and then I think I think we take it a little bit more seriously. That doesn't mean I think we haven't even talked about whether we're going to have her on, frankly, to my knowledge.
I mean, we've been trying to have other politicians on that we just like literally drop the ball on because we are kind of we run a like it's not that.
But
many
we don't do
people
that
staff
much.
It. I know we don't. I know, but we'd had like
we
two
don't.
people.
Sam
we
doesn't like talking to
and I forgot.
politicians.
Yeah, right.
And
He
he's
doesn't.
too cynical.
I like it more. Yeah, actually.
He's like honestly, Bernie's one of the only ones that he's not like reserved about. So
and Ilhan and right. I mean,
right, but even then, it's like it's not as we're not as enthusiastic. We're not having Ilhan on every week, and like Sam wouldn't want to do that.
Yes.
No, I understand. I do think that Sam, last time I called, I don't want to be annoying, but I will be if I have to. I think he kind of mischaracterized what I said once. He kind of, I didn't take it personally, but he kind of made it sound like I was expecting the Majority Report to like move the masses, That's not what I was asking.
Okay.
I know that to a certain extent, Marianne Williamson is not being given the acknowledgement that I think as a candidate she should, not just from the mainstream, but I worry through this channel as well. So the Majority Report, let me just say, has more segments and videos on Nikki Haley than the only progressive candidate that is echoing absolutely everything that you stand for. That's
not absolutely everything
everything
that I stand for. Like I don't like again like the thing she speaks on certain things, and like I mean, to be honest, even Bernie on certain Israel Palestine things I'm not entirely in agreement with, but like there's certain like questions like that where she's talking about Avatar, and like I know like it's unfair to people talk about the crystals and stuff, but it's also not grounded in like my politics.
No.
So like, and Nikki Haley is like there's actually like
a threat that she could actually be the
Yeah.
vice president, and Marianne Williamson will not be the president. So the point is just that, like, we have a finite amount of time, a finite amount of things that we can emphasize. I don't think that it's a correct characterization that she represents my politics, because my politics are not just about ideas and what she says, which I love that she says good things and has a good heart. I believe that about her. I care way more about the power coalitions behind that politician, and she has none of that. She's really has no unions behind her, no organizations that I really follow, and so for me, it doesn't matter that much to me, if I'm being fully honest.
Also, this conversation might be a little bit different if there wasn't an incumbent Democratic president. Like, no one's gonna put a challenge up to Biden. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen. Like, unless Biden himself, which it doesn't seem like it's gonna happen, decides not to run for re-election. There is no real Democratic primary. Even if Bernie tried to, he said he's not going to if Biden chooses to run again. But even if Bernie ended up being the one to challenge a sitting Democratic president in Biden, it would just not get the same play as if this was some open Democratic primary where there was no incumbent. It's just not the dynamics calling for this. There's just nothing's gonna come out of this. And maybe there'd be a bigger conversation if Marianne had that movement behind her that would make it interesting that she could possibly push Biden on issues, but she doesn't even have that. Like, she's not going to push Biden on anything. Let's be honest.
And it's up to her to develop it if it's going to happen. And I don't think it's on like skeptical media or like sort of lukewarm media to make it happen.
But look, Elena, we got to jump in a sec. Just final thoughts from you. I think your heart's in the right place, as I think Marianne Williamson's is. I just don't think the circumstances really line up for the kind of coverage that you would like, to be honest, from us. I have to be honest with my perspective, you know?
I think it's fair. I'm coming from a place of someone, last time she was running, that completely bought into the whole crystal guru spiritual, BS that was being sold. I didn't think of her once. I didn't consider her. I thought she was just a kook. I bought into it. And it wasn't until she started running today, forgive me, I don't remember exactly what it was that she said, but it was completely different. I genuinely felt cheated by an entire media machine, whether you feel like you belong to it or not. I respect your show. I respect your mission. But I saw something completely different, and I really felt betrayed by just the portrayals. I think everything you guys are saying is fair.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Elena. Thank you for calling in. Got to jump. I apologize.
Yeah, and I will say I think like Pac-Man is going too hard on like trying to cut it off at the knees. And I mean that's why when we talked about the first time, it was upset with Karine Jean-Pierre with her like bullshit little joke about it.
Condescending.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's wrong, but it's also like there's only so much time I can act like enthusiastic about it without my actual reservations about it coming through.
Right. She should absolutely run if she wants to run. And anyone who's like pointing out some like doom or gloom scenario and having a Democratic primary is ridiculous, because it's just honestly not even going to be I mean, I wish it wasn't this way, but it is. It's not even going to be a blip on the radar when you have if you have a primary where in the party that has the incumbent in office. It's just not even it doesn't matter, honestly. She should be able to run because it shows that she has the ability to do so, and anyone who wants to run should be able to run. But and I would love to talk with her too. I think it would be probably a great conversation, but it's just honestly just the reality of the situation is it's just nothing's going to come out of it.
I would interview Marianne Williamson about the whole kit and caboodle, the run, the crystals, everything, because that's just my wheelhouse. But so if she wants to come on the discourse, I know my co-host would also love to. She can reach out and we will have her on. We'll make it work after I move. We'll make it happen.
Beautiful. All right, let's do this Charlie Kirk clip here. So Charlie Kirk, I guess, on the phone here with the person behind the hate account Chaya Raichik, the hate account
the totally
lives on
normal,
TikTok.
well-adjusted higher rate chick from what's that cult called that she's part of?
I don't know.
I forget the Hebrews extremist.
Either way, she's a religious extremist and a complete nutcase that ended up people figuring out, who she was. She was identified at January 6th, and now her identity has been revealed to the world, much like she did to unsuspecting teachers and other gay, queer, trans people by blasting them on her hate account. So here she is now speaking with Charlie Kirk about what she characterizes as the rise of trans-identifying kids because of, you guessed it, the very scary Chinese communist TikTok.
Do you think that the rising amount of kids identifying as trans is largely because of TikTok?
Yes, I think it is absolutely a social contagion, and I think TikTok is a big driver of that.
So about 45 seconds, explain to the older listeners that might be skeptical of that why. They say, how could somebody become trans because of a social media app?
Well, the idea of TikTok is to target kids, right? You don't see really a lot of older people on it. It's very kid friendly, and the Chinese algorithm, they feed this stuff specifically to American kids.
The Chinese algorithm.
All right, pause. So I thought the algorithm was done with math and like numbers and symbols, but I guess this one's in Chinese letters, so that makes it demonic.
This one is just all like Chinese symbols and like occasionally like a sickle and hammer.
Yes.
So I read every few of them. If you look into it, it's not HTML. That's not how they do this.
No. I mean, and they put hidden messages in there.
Also,
that's
I
Chinese
wait,
Communist Party at work.
I just gotta point out, what would this woman do without TikTok? It's her whole fucking thing. Like, what would she do if TikTok got banned? Where would she steal these videos of these under 18 kids just expressing themselves in a place that they find to be safe for themselves to do so, and putting them on blast in front of a bunch of weirdos aged 40 and above who are attacking these kids? What would she do without that content to mine from? She would be nobody, nothing.
Yeah.
Well, this is projection. This is, these are people who are engaged in a propaganda war. Like people, Charlie Kirk, libs of TikTok, associated right-wing demagogues who use social media specifically to propagandize their unpopular opinion. They're always trying to hide their ideas, launder them into the mainstream. And so, of course, they, either disingenuously or, strategically believe that their opponents are doing the same thing because they have positioned trans people, the LGBTQ community, other minorities groups, not as just people trying to live their lives, make content online, largely vlogging, personal content. A lot of stuff that they hate is just like barely political. It's just people living their lives and then like daring to have like blue hair on like a subway platform. And they want to believe that they're engaging in the same kind of work that Charlie Kirk and his ilk are, which is like laundering a type of like political message into what otherwise like, a mass of sheep who are just there to be like grifted. But that's just not how everyone engages in social media. Some people are just trying to, have fun.
Yeah. Also, I just want to note that when she says social contagion, when people talk about genocidal rhetoric towards trans people,
Yeah, it's a moral panic. It's just the kind of thing that, it relies on people. Now we have mass media. Now people feel more comfortable coming out of the closet. So you see a lot of people, you see that reflected in media, and it's easy for people who have been, not in tune to the way the world actually works to pretend like trans people just came out of nowhere. That 20 years ago, no one was trans. And now, like, if you look at people who, I think there was a survey that came out of some research firm, like how much of the population people believe is trans versus how much the population is actually trans. And there's just a really wide gap. I think the actual, I hate to like poorly quote like
the country is trans, right?
Yeah.
I think it was like 40%. People thought like 40% of the country was black, which is like not true. It's like 14%. They thought like 10 to like 15% was trans. And it's like I think less than 1. It's
60% of Zoomers are trans now.
Exactly. It's easy
it's spreading like wildfire.
Yeah, no, those are telltale sounds. The telltale signs of a moral panic, of a sex panic being run by people who are very, very afraid of losing their like social position in the sort of like access to class, advancement that it usually provides, and they're afraid of being replaced by Zoomers. It's very transparent, and it's a deep history of like in Republican ideology of these kinds of moral panics, especially targeted at LGBTQ groups.
We saw it. We saw it happen in real time when Matt Walsh went on Joe Rogan's show and claimed that like millions of kids were transitioning, and they had to check it in real time, and they had to bring Matt Walsh the unfortunate news for him that it was like something like a
few thousand over a 5-year period. Yes.
Right.
So it was, he thought it was millions. He'd done a whole documentary on this topic, but didn't know basic facts, and overinflated them by thousands times over about how many trans kids were in the country. But that's exactly what you guys are saying. I mean, this is the inflated moral panic that we hear. But let's start over, try to hear this psychopath's words
Also,
in as clearly as possible.
Algorithm is a Hindu Arabic word, so a Chinese algorithm. Like, we are creating a super monster.
Double hatred of America. Oh my God.
Do you think that the rising amount of kids identifying as trans is largely because of TikTok?
Yes, I think it is absolutely a social contagion, and I think TikTok is a big driver of that.
So about 45 seconds, explain to the older listeners that might be skeptical of that why. They say, how could somebody become trans because of a social media
Yeah,
app?
freak out the old freaks that never logged
the
on.
idea of TikTok is to target kids, right? You don't see really a lot of older people on it. It's very kid friendly, and the Chinese algorithm, they feed this stuff specifically to American kids. So they're feeding these trans activist content, telling kids, look, go on puberty blockers. You might be the opposite gender. Maybe you'll be happier. And I believe that it's a really sophisticated algorithm that's directly feeding this to our children.
That's exactly right. I just want everyone to understand. I mean, look, TikTok, owned by the Chinese Communist Party, we have enough evidence for me to say this. I on good authority believe, and I think any rational person would, that the Chinese Communist Party military installations are programming the algorithm to make our children more likely to be trans, to try to get young men to be ashamed of their country. The CCP has a gateway into every single one of our kids via TikTok. Why are we putting up with that? That's a political question. We're going to answer that.
Well, free market, baby. Free market. The kids want it, so they get it. So they want that Chinese Communist Party, baby. They love it. The kids love the Chinese Communist Party. Keep saying Chinese Communist Party. It doesn't sound scarier the more times you say it, Charlie Kirk. There.
Actually,
Psychopath.
we should continue to let our children know that the communists TikTok brought to you by a communist. So if you love TikTok,
You love
baby.
communism. There we go. Perfect. That's perfect for our psychological operation.
This idea, I mean, ludicrous that China is inflicting on us this social contagion of transness, just like they suggest they did with COVID, to make us weaker and hate America.
Did you know that they also implemented a social contagion of left-handedness? Like, suddenly, there's so many Americans that identify as left-handed.
Well, they're doing it to themselves too. I mean, this is from Bloomberg. China's first clinic for transgender kids opens in Shanghai. Like, that's 2021. Like, wow, they really, like, that's very nihilistic. Not only are they taking down their main enemy, they're trying to take down themselves as well.
I mean, same thing with
social
COVID, right?
contagion, yeah.
I mean, that's how you really, really get up on the Americans. You kill some of your own people. You go after trans people in your own country just so it can be exported to the United States. That's the real bioweapon we're at play here.
Yeah, it's less about, it's less about what's going on in China and more about what China represents for American hegemony abroad. But, that is a little bit of a complex idea for like the average Charlie Kirk listener. So really all they need to know is the traditional, xenophobic talking point of there's a foreign actor, foreign in the sense of non-white and also non-American, who is trying to degrade American culture through some sort of, propaganda campaign that turns your kids trans, that makes your white daughters date black people. Now your sister-in-law is an Islamist extremist. It doesn't necessarily have to be China for Americans to feel this strongly about it, but there is this, America only does well when we have an outside threat. That's why people always harken back to the time post 9/11. Yeah, a lot of people might have died, but for a moment, I didn't feel like I was, not part of the American tapestry.
Yeah, right. I can't believe someone like Chaya Raichik is,
A Freudian case like her?
They have TikTok banned her. They should ban her for spreading lies about the platform. But I think Republicans like to pretend like these platforms are left owned because it also makes it seem like their content is actually uniquely good instead of uniquely bad.
Oh yeah, they're scratching each other's back with all this shit.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was trying to say earlier about the whole Rumble conversation, right? Where it's just like they don't love that the marketplace of ideas doesn't necessarily favor them, so they have to make it about where it's rigged against us.
We have somebody clipped a clip of Sam on the PBD podcast.
Oh yeah, should we play that?
Yeah, Glenn Greenwald, Tom Cook is a blunt.
Do you think Sam wants us to save this for when he comes back tomorrow?
I think we can still get into it with Sam, but I mean maybe we can all do just a reaction, a cold reaction to this section here.
I hear that these reaction videos are very popular online, so let's try to dip into that pool here.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Sam on the PBD podcast.
Hot off the presses. We haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, this is a case for the Founding Fathers.
Oh.
From good old PBD. Now I'm not going to learn what those actually stand for, but
right. Well, I think it's his name.
Speaking of Founding Fathers, look at Sam's hair.
I mean, Sam really he went wild with it. But that's a denim shirt. That's
I think
not
it's the same one he was wearing on the last show. So.
No, I don't. It can't be. But that's just not his normal rotation. He pulled out all the stops for this, I guess. But here we go.
No, so you're more concerned about power. If I could say this, if you think about what is the greatest case study in the world ever, right? And we rank the top 10 greatest case studies. There's a lot of them, right? What the case studies could be. But one of the greatest case studies in the world is how this, group of 50-something men came together who were not happy about what was going on in Britain. And they started this idea in 1776. And they wrote out the Federalist Paper, the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And then that went and turned into this behemoth of a country that positively impacted the world, technology that's being used around the world, and it validated that the best economical system in the world is capitalism. If it allowed people to go out there and are willing to work and how big of a dream they wanted to build and how big of a life they wanted to build, you kind of leave them alone. If they put a limit on how big of a YouTube channel you could make, you can't have a YouTube channel over 10 million. I mean, you wouldn't have PewDiePie, you wouldn't have Mr. Beast. Maybe you'd be happy if you didn't have these guys.
I'm not too familiar with those guys. But let me just say this, though. But if what you were saying was true, right? I mean, if we were really just going to base it,
it is true.
I mean,
this is the greatest case study ever.
Well, but if you really want to...
We're ranking case studies. We're ranking case studies. All right. I mean, honestly, people rank best movies of all time. It's like The Godfather or whatever. I didn't realize that we were also doing a BuzzFeed ranked list on case studies.
How are we defining case studies?
I don't know. I mean,
Brandon, you're from the social scientists. Do you understand what he's talking about there?
I think he's just using business words to describe what is a not necessarily business, term. Usually people call it experiment. They use the word experiment instead, an experiment in democracy.
Yeah.
A case study in democracy sounds worse, but it's how consultants talk about their past projects. But I just overwhelmingly think that we need to teach history better in this country. Because I was so confused what he was talking about when he first started describing the founding of America. It was 50 people. is he referring to like the Pilgrims or like?
I
what?
mean,
50
how's he
people?
going to refer to the slavery that capitalism was built on?
It sounded like Hamilton.
Our coworkers.
The case study, yeah, like the case study that led to civil war less than 100 years after it was begun.
Yeah,
that
right.
was a great
This is
case study that led to the greatest industrial war that the world had ever seen at that point.
I hope they rank their favorite Disney characters next, honestly.
This is like a common like teleological fallacy that underpins a lot of like excuses about like America and the atrocities that it has committed both at home and abroad. And that's just that like, well, we're the best country though. And so like whatever we had to do to get here. Yeah, we have PewDiePie's from like Sweden or something.
Yeah, isn't he a fascist too? Allegedly.
And Mr. Beast is from Nebraska, I want to say. So I mean, that's a part of America. So 1 out of 2. But at the end of the day, it's just like we describe a lot of what America has done through the lens of like working backwards, that we had to be here. Like we had to be here. We had to have like a new iPod every week. We had to have like manufactured obsolescence. Everything that we do now that makes the world a worse place is necessary because it's part of the whole package of
it's
America.
Manifest Destiny, in 2023.
Yeah, it's the ends justify the means at the end of the day, and it really explains or like it shows or it can be used to explain like how in contrast we describe atrocities abroad versus atrocities here. Like there are 2 buckets largely speaking when it comes to genocide in this world. Atrocities, mass war crimes. There are ones that are justified through like the fact that teleologically they resulted in the West. They resulted in the West, having the kind of hegemony that it has now. And then there are the ones that are eccentricities of modernity that aren't the result of our rise to Western, hegemony or like part of like the ideals that represent that, like the Holocaust, like the various things that went like on in the colonial Africa that we ignore in history. Those are forgotten about largely because they just paint a bad picture of modernity or they're treated as eccentricities. But like when you talk about the extermination of Native Americans, when you talk about like the extermination of African peoples as part of the the Atlantic slave trade, the various parts of like South America that has never recovered from like that sort of thing. People look at that in this lens of like, well, that's all part of the world's greatest case study in America.
Yeah, we gotta play Sam's response though. Here we go. Yeah, right. Is that the end of the video?
Oh, that was the end of that video. Yeah. We'll have Sam. He'll
so
walk
that's
us
just a
through more of his
teaser.
response. Yeah. I just like the idea that
I can go through it for tomorrow, though.
No, it's fine. I was excited.
How could you argue with the ultimate case study that obviously ends with
I bet what Sam said doesn't even matter because PBD's logic was so sound.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, infallible, right? God.
Look
Thank
at all
God.
What would we do without the largest YouTube account, or not even the large YouTube account? Because the largest YouTube account is like Sony Music, because people just watch a bunch of YouTube videos.
It's Mr. Beast. You know how we know that the American experiment has been won? We have Philip DeFranco.
Oh my gosh, we have hype houses. You know how many hype houses we have in this country?
Emma, Brandon, mind if I just ask you guys? Just thinking about it. All-time favorite case study?
My God, there's so many to choose from.
That's tough.
I can speak for Sam. Maybe his would be the Social Security and Medicare being a good grand experiment in the United States. And for that, that's a damn good case study, baby.
For me, it's the Milgram experiment is up there. There's also the Kitty Genovese thing.
Kitty Genovese, the Stanford prison experiment.
That one's good.
Yeah, those are some good case studies. But next to America. It's hard to say. It's hard to put one of those.
What are the controls on that?
My favorite case study is Kid Nation, the Fox reality TV show where they trap all of those children
Kid Nation.
in the desert and like let them run a town.
That was before there were any controls on reality TV, and like that would probably be illegal.
No, I mean Jersey Shore. That's my favorite case study. The show Jersey Shore, where they give them no phones, no TV, no books, and they film them for 24 hours straight for a whole month.
Kid Nation
and a lot of alcohol.
Kid Nation was actually like Lord of the Flies. They basically hey, you're on your own, build a society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, what? Go ahead, Brandon.
I would say honorable mention to MILF Island for the second best case study.
Yeah.
I mean, it's newer, but it's up there in terms of case
Emma,
studies.
Do you know what can I spoil the twist for MILF Island? Do you guys, or MILF, is it MILF Manor?
No,
or
MILF Island is from 30 Rock.
MILF
It's
Manor.
MILF Manor.
Wait, before you spoil it,
Brandon?
No, but before you spoil it, I just realized that I think I would rather be in the Stanford prison experiment than be on MILF Manor, the television show.
I was going to say,
I think that's a very easy choice to make.
I was going to have a Stanford prison joke too, which is that like Stanford prison study. Well, we already mentioned America, but
Emma, do you know this? Do you know like the twist in MILF Manor though?
No,
They're
but
not
like maybe
related?
somebody wants to watch it. So
I need to say it.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to give
Spoiler
you
alerts, folks.
an aneurysm.
They are the MILFs. The MILFs are all dating these guys, and then it's revealed mid-season that they are all their sons.
Right, I knew that.
Oh, sorry. Is that not a
episode.
twist? I thought that was a twist.
I thought that was the premise.
wait, so the son's moms, they're not dating their moms, but other moms.
Like they're dating the other, like they're all of their sons.
Yeah, no,
are, like,
that's
dating other
the
moms.
premise of the show. That's not the twist.
Oh, sorry,
That's the
Brandon. I
first
thought
episode.
that was like the big reveal.
Still wild as hell.
Isn't that insane?
No, that's
though?
what
To
makes
me,
it. That's
like,
what makes
shocking.
it wild. How could they keep that secret? They're all in the same island / manor. That's like.
But they must
that's
keep
what-
them.
It could have been a large manor.
Yeah.
Seen your mom make out with some.
Is that my mom?
Because like the whole show was like apparently they like got people to sign up for 2 reality shows and then they just surprised them by being on the one with their mom. So it's like it's not like MTV's Date My Mom. It was more like they showed up to the island only to be surprised, and then the rest of the show was them being surprised.
Oh, well, that's great. That is wonderful. All right. Since we have no IMs, I guess we got a wrap here. I mean,
There you go.
Sorry, guys.
Hopefully
no
it's
more
fixed for tomorrow, folks.
time for calls. Yeah, we our friend who's is not in the office who normally helps us with this.
Good old
stuff.
Kyle.
Kyle. I didn't know if I should say Kyle's name, but yes, we will try to have that fixed tomorrow. Anyway, sorry guys, no more time for calls. Hanging up. I apologize. Bing bong. We'll see you tomorrow. Sam will be back. He will give us tales of the PBD podcast.
The PBD-BD breakdown.
Yeah. Matt is like fixated on these different, like on the Sonic.
Those initials have ruined my brain. I can't.
Yeah,
get
it's
out
just
of it.
can't get it out. Anyway, check out Doomed, Scam Economy, The Discourse, Left Reckoning, ESVN. Appreciate you guys. Great show. We will see you on tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth